We are looking at English home language and how to prepare for paper 1. And we're going to look at question 4, which is the cartoon question. So here is an example from the November 2023 paper. So we have the frames labeled for you, and the source is given to you, and it's a Calvin and Hobbes cartoon, and they tell you at the bottom of the cartoon who the characters are, because they don't want you to get confused or muddled or not know what's going on. So just read the cartoon there. We've got Calvin talking to Hobbes about maths not being a science but a religion, and Hobbes questions that. In frame 2, Calvin says equations are like miracles, talks about the magic of addition, and ends by saying you either believe it or you don't. Then in frame 3, he's pointing at his book full of things have to be accepted on faith. It's a religion. And then he's still at his desk with his book, and Hobbes is saying in the public schools and call a lawyer, and he says as a maths atheist he should be excused. Right. So let's look at the questions and see in what way they are typical of questions asked about a cartoon. Always look at your keywords and your question words. The question words refer and provide. And what have we got to do? We've got to refer to frame 1, one indicator showing that Hobbes is confused. What's your mark allocation? You want to finish this paper comfortably. You don't want to spend time unnecessarily. It's 1 mark, so 1 indicator of his confusion. Now, what's really important is that you are specific. Very often, students just say, you can see it by looking at him. It's too vague. So it says 1 indicator. It doesn't tell you whether it has to be visual or part of the language. So you could talk about the fact that he's got his paw, his finger, up to his head. He appears to be scratching. You could talk about the eyes being very big and sort of looking down in this surprised way. Or you could refer to the question mark there. But just 1. Do 1 and move on. Because the next question is a bit more challenging, even though it's still for 1 mark. How would his tone change if it were written in a jagged speech bubble? So be careful. Watch that mark allocation. You do not have to talk about what the round speech bubble does, but let's just have a look at the round speech bubble. It suggests that he is simply not understanding. He's saying, could you repeat that? I don't really get this. But what if this were a jagged speech bubble? What would that do? That would surely suggest that he is, and tone. Sorry, before I answer this, tone, such a difficult question. Remember, I am asking about what is Hobbes feeling, and you need to get it as accurate as you possibly can. I would suggest he would be shocked, a religion. He would be startled. What? A religion? He would be disbelieving. So as I've said before, tone is difficult because you've got to get that feeling as accurately as possible, which is a test of your vocab. So you simply say his tone would be this under those circumstances. Now be very, very careful. You are often told which frames to refer to. It's really important that you look at the right frames. So what must I do once I've looked at the right frames? I must discuss. What do I have to discuss? The change in the viewpoint. And do I have to look at anything else? Yes, I've got to look at the verbal cues. Verbal. Not visual, verbal. So it's really, really important. Now, there's a lot of work to be done on this question as opposed to the other two. So what have I got to do? It's a discuss question. I've got to say, Calvin's viewpoint was A, this, and it becomes B, that, because this, I'm assuming, will come from frame 1, and this will come from frame 3. So I've got to say this was his viewpoint, and this becomes his viewpoint. Then what have I got to do? I've got to refer closely to the verbal cues to explain how the verbal cues, so I'm going to give some verbal cues, and then I'm going to explain how those verbal cues show me that his viewpoint has changed. That's going to be the discussion, is when I show the link. Right. So let's go back and look at frames 1 and frames 3 and look at his viewpoint. Okay, frame 1, what is his viewpoint? Well, maths is a mystery. It's not science. Science is rational, science is reasonable, so it can't be explained rationally, and it's religion. So what do we associate religion with? Faith. So science is associated with reason and religion with faith. So maths isn't a science, it isn't reasonable, it isn't rational, it's got to be taken on faith, right? Then in frame 3, he's still talking about maths, and he's still saying that they have to be accepted on faith and it's a religion. So what's the difference? So if you're saying to yourself, well, hang on, he's saying the same thing, but look at the you know, and look at the I don't think, I think. So this sounds as if he's still exploring his ideas. He's not yet asserting them. Whereas in this one, notice the exclamation marks. He's no longer saying, I think, I think. Look at this. I don't think, I think. Now it's, this is what it is. He is asserting it. And he's asserting it really, really forcefully. So for me, in frame 3, I would say he is outraged. It's where he is really angry because he thinks something is unfair. It's the same argument, but now he is so frustrated. He is so agitated. He is so resentful that this is the way things are. So that is the difference. So when it says, where are we? The change in his viewpoint is he changes from suggesting that maths is irrational and suggesting that things must be taken on faith to being outraged and frustrated and resentful because that's the way things are. Right, have I done everything? Have I explained the change in the viewpoint? Yes, I've gone from making a suggestion to being absolutely assertive. Right. I've done the whole thing about religion and science. Right, so I've got that. Have I looked at the verbal cues? Yes, I have. I've looked at the exclamation marks and I've looked at words like science and religion, and then I've discussed this to show that he's moved, especially in the exclamation marks, from suggesting something, I've talked about the I thinks, to the exclamation mark. So it's quite a lot of work for the 3 marks. So what's the difference between discuss and critically discuss, or comment on and critically comment on? So notice we've made a move here from discuss to critically discuss. So very often, a critically discussed question asks you to look at like both sides of something. That's how you get the critical. But I don't think it's going to work here, because look at what we've got to discuss, how humor is created in the final frame. So the critically discuss is going to be, well, what is the humor in the final frame? So I've got to state what that humor is. And then I've got to explain how that humor is created. And that's going to be my discussion. Now, humor is very, very difficult, because humor is related to who people are as individuals, and society, and where they live, and their culture, and all of those things. So how do I prepare for a humor question in this exam? I would always look for irony or satire. So let's just revise this quickly. Irony is a contrast between this, which is what we think or believe, and that, which is the reality. So, and you answer an irony question by saying this but that. This is what I thought, but this is what actually happened. This is what I was hoping for in the exams, but this is what the result finally was. This is what I believed about my boyfriend, but this is what he's actually like. That is irony. Satire is criticism. You criticize somebody. What for? Their faults, their sins, their wickedness, their evil. Well, Calvin isn't exactly evil. He's just a 5-year-old. But satire will be criticism of Calvin. Right. So what do? We go to the final frame. There it is. What's the humor? So we've gone from Calvin. So if we look at the whole cartoon, Calvin clearly was battling with his maths homework. And so he starts to say that maths isn't logical. You've just got to take it on faith. Equations are like miracles. In other words, he doesn't understand how addition works. You take 2 numbers and they magically become a new number, and he doesn't get it. No one can say how it happens. Look at the exaggeration there out of his despair. You either believe it or you don't, because he doesn't know how it works. Then he's, I've said, outraged and frustrated and resentful, and he ends up by saying that he's a maths atheist, and so he should be excused from this. So we know that religion is a very sensitive topic in schools. So atheists are generally excused from, let's say, a religious ceremony. So he should be excused because he's a maths atheist. So what is the first kind of humor? We could say it is ironic that Calvin uses an excuse of saying that he's an atheist and so he shouldn't do maths, because he's now premising that on the argument that maths is a religion. So it's ironic that he knows it's an excuse. He knows he simply doesn't understand his maths, and he's found this elaborate reason that he should be excused from his maths homework. Before we go on and look at Hobbes, let's take an ad break. Welcome back. We are looking at cartoons. But before I go on, a big shout out to our sponsor, Liberty. Liberty has been supporting education in South Africa for over 30 years, and without them this wouldn't be possible. Please would you download the Tenfold Education app. You will find it so useful and valuable. And would you join us on YouTube at Mindset Learn? we're looking at the question which deals with humor. And we're looking at this last frame, and we talked about the irony of Calvin's making an excuse. He's pretending to believe that maths is a religion, and so as an atheist, as a maths atheist, he should be excused. But he knows very well that it's simply that he doesn't understand maths. But let's look at Hobbes. And I said we could look at irony or at satire. And Hobbes satirizes Calvin. He's criticizing Calvin. So the first thing he says, and in public schools, no less. So that's the first joke that he makes. He satirizes Calvin by suggesting that public schools are promoting religion, which they shouldn't be doing. And so he is mocking. He mocks Calvin by pretending to believe him and take him seriously. And then he satirizes him by saying, call a lawyer. So he's saying that what is being done to Calvin is criminal, and he should call his lawyer. So he satirizes Calvin. What is Calvin's fault? Not a sin, not a wickedness, not an evil. His fault is because of his 5-year-old frustration with maths. He's trying to find a way out instead of grappling with the problem. And Hobbes is mocking him, satirizing him, criticizing him for his throwing a fit, for his childish behavior, and for his deliberately creating this ridiculous excuse and pretending to take him seriously. So he's mocking him. Humor's always difficult, so you really need to practice questions about humor. And then we suddenly have a language question about religion. So it says, provide the suffix. So our question word is provide. What do I have to provide? A suffix for the adjectival form. So religion. Religion is a noun. It is naming something. Your religion, your desk, your house, it's naming something. So the first thing we've got to do is give the adjectival form. So we get to religious. And now we want a suffix required for the adjectival form of religion. So what we've got is the IOUS. We've got religious. And then we have to have a synonym for lawyer. I didn't like this question much. I thought of an attorney, but an attorney and a lawyer are not quite the same thing. And then I thought of a solicitor, but a solicitor and a lawyer are not quite the same thing. And you'll see that there are other examples in the marking guidelines. It's just one, you just provide one, and it's not a synonym. It's a related word, if you like. So in the visual literacy questions, they also can ask language questions.